Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Socializing Security. We're glad to have you back. Milou and I are here to talk about all the things security, compliance, and things related to it. This is our third episode now, so we've broken the 3-episode. Next episode, I guess we're going to break out of prime numbers. But yeah, the first 2 episodes, we kind of talked through who we are. So if you didn't listen to those and curious why these 2 people have a podcast and what you should do to trust them or where they're coming from, those are the 2 episodes to listen to learn about each of us. And then we actually have a preview episode that we did before that goes more directly at what we're trying to accomplish here. We're now kind of in a phase where we're going to start exploring some of the topics at a really high level that we want to cover and start to kind of formulate what those ideas are without really necessarily getting into them too deep. We've got some interesting stuff to talk about on those topics. There's a lot to talk about, of course, and hopefully this episode leaves everyone wanting a lot more. Mm-hmm. I already know we are going to want more, so lucky for you all that want more too, because you know that we'll do that. So, how are you, Milou?
I'm doing well. I'm honestly, I'm proud of us for being here. I think you and I are both very similar in some of the ways that we like to manage our projects, and we're both just like very busy, but this is very important to us. And so it's been kind of great to just kind of lean into that about being like, these are the things we really care about, and that's what we're going to focus on first. But it doesn't mean that we've already talked about this, but we just have a lot of ideas on where we could go with this idea. And we're starting to do some reach outs to people we might get to talk to as speakers to start introducing topics they want to talk to us about, which is honestly awesome. Like, it's kind of wonderful that we have like no agenda, in the sense that I truly just want to like hang out and socialize security, right? Like, we want to talk about these topics at a high level or dive in with experts and bring in professionals across industries. It's not specifically related to IT. We're just ready to talk to anyone about security and the things that come with it. And one of the things that I've been spending a lot of thought leadership on and so much research, and I know it's on all of our news feeds, is generative AI. And we are also in the same space going to be recording one of our first episodes on generative AI.
Of course.
But in a different way, because there's a twist to it, right? In the sense that these technologies are advancing so rapidly. And given my more compliance and regulatory background, there's a lot of like fear in the community around how do we even like put our arms around this thing, right? Like, we're excited about the innovation and also like terrified about the potential outcomes. Yeah. And so I think the goal is to just kind of talk about like trust today and what that means when we're talking about generative AI. But also I want to say, like, I'm somebody who's like an avid user. Like, I'm not on the like, don't use it. I'm very much on the side of let's use it, but let's how to figure out how to do that safely. Yeah.
And so, I tend to be more of the grumpy old man shaking his fist in the clouds when it comes to it, because, unless I see a direct advantage to me using it, I try not to use it, to be honest. Like, I'm kind of a laggard adopter on it, and yeah, I've played the games and I've asked it the funny questions and I've forced it to say some goofy things, but there's an element of it that I want to understand it, but I don't want to use it any more than I need to understand it. And so, yeah, definitely looking forward to talking about some of these elements with you, Milou, because again, we're going to bring very different perspectives on it, and hopefully that makes it interesting in a way for everyone that's listening to be able to kind of clamp on to one of the 2 of us and follow along with us and be able to hear the other side's perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm coming from the side of, in my mindset, I think I have to learn how to use it, because I'm worried that it ultimately will start, like, my type of work could be replaced by people that know how to use it well. I don't believe that, like, compliance and consulting and that side of the house, like there's still like a significant human element in that review part of it. I think will be really hard for that to overcome. But if we think about efficiency and making certain tasks, like compliance tasks, sometimes they're very administrative, for example. So helping to like figure out how to like mitigate some of the like administrative tasks and then leaving more room for the true thought leadership and research and generation of original content and original ideas. I think there's like, that's kind of where my balance sits.
Yeah. And, same thing from my perspective, being mostly in a tech marketing type of role these days, and thinking about the messaging and how we communicate and creating materials. A lot of that is going to, like, we can use generative AI to do a lot of that. It still takes somebody that knows the stuff to prompt it properly. And that gets into a whole nother topic, which is, prompt engineering and a whole new class of jobs.
Can't wait for that one.
Yeah. But it's still, and I think we'll touch on this, it's still in a mode where I, as an expert, I'm going to have to review everything that comes out of a Gen AI platform because honestly, I don't trust it yet. Like it screws up so much that it's something that needs to be reviewed by somebody who we do trust. And of course, humans make mistakes and it is what it is, but I'm going to be able to pick out a lot of the mistakes it makes pretty quickly, but it is a tool that will improve my workflow and make things go faster. So it has its advantages today as it is.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think what's interesting about it is on the compliance side, you've seen so much of a culture, like in the last couple of years, compliance like rebranded to trust, right? You no longer see like compliance links, you see like trust and transparency, and companies have moved away from like compliance portals to like security portals and trust centers. And part of that is a really big part of it is transparency. And that is one of the things that I personally think is lacking from the conversation, because I don't feel like the technology itself for some of these very large platforms that are creating tools that have like millions and millions of users are scaling so rapidly that they don't have the time to necessarily think thoughtfully about being transparent with their security practices and their compliance and legal requirements. And so there's that like transparency piece is kind of what's missing for me, which is where it's like, well, where actually does this data sit, right? Like we've done so much work in the compliance and regulatory space over the last couple of years of making sure that like data residency is a really important requirement, and portability, and making sure that like we understand who has access to system data and where is it going. And that's one of the things that I sometimes get like a little concerned about when we talk about trust is I think, as you said, you might not trust it. I also am like, I don't even know how to trust it yet because I don't think they're being transparent about that yet.
A lot of the news stories end up being about, I mean, I think as we record this, there's already lawsuits going on that, are essentially saying that I, as a content creator, have, and I don't mean I'm talking in the royal I as a content creator created some stuff, and now generative AI platforms have utilized that content to train it. And now it's regurgitating some of my words verbatim. And that's not fair use. And so, there's a lot of concerns from that perspective that, from an industry side of things are going to push back pretty hard, the journalism industry, and those of us that have to, get paid to write for a living aren't going to look kindly on that. We generally don't like it when somebody just copies our work.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, because I play around with this portion too, because I'm not a journalist and I'm not a writer, but I am like a content creator on LinkedIn, for example, like as social media platforms. And so because I have a consulting practice, I build out my business that way, which means I have to be a little bit more comfortable with expanding my privacy settings. And that means that like I can go into some of these toolings and ask it to like rephrase something like me.
Yeah.
Which I think is terrifying. As much as I'm like, oh great, that makes drafting this thing a little easier. It's like, oh, we'll turn it into Milou. Well, then it's like still like compliant, but more approachable and friendly. But like that is kind of scary. I did that with with a couple of different people to just like test it. And if they had decent online presences and they had people that like post publicly on social media platforms, it was like pretty dead on.
Real world behind the curtains type thing is we were investigating what platform to use for recording our podcasts. and doing editing and stuff like that. One of the features I stumbled across several platforms had is, they'll automatically do transcripts, and that's a fairly safe AI thing. Whether that's really AI or not is another story, because it's been around for years. If you delete portions of the transcript, it'll delete portions of the video. Some of them had a feature where if you type in some words into the transcript directly, it would actually read those in your voice. And that just blew my mind. Like, okay, the whole deepfake thing and we all knew it was coming at us. Again, deepfakes have been around for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
I think it's a common term at this point. Like, they talk about it on Good Morning America and shows like that.
Well, Taylor Swift was in the news about it, so obviously it's important.
Yeah. and there's that too. And Joe Biden's been in the news. Like, there was a news article about somebody did a robocall that used Joe Biden's voice that was essentially trying to convince people not to go vote. And of course, it linked back to his opponents in the political space. So, like, can you believe anybody? There was essentially somebody that got scammed in a typical phishing type scenario. Hey, I need you to go authorize this payment of $4 million to this person. We all have hopefully been trained well enough to avoid those things. So that person did the right thing. They're like, can we get on a call and discuss this? Because I don't know that I really trust this. They actually get on a video call and they see what looks like their CFO and their manager. And it turns out both of those were completely deepfaked. Match the voice, match the face, authorize the payment. How are we supposed to live in this world anymore with that kind of stuff happening? Like, I'm deadly afraid of phishing as it is, but now this is happening. Like, forget about it. Like, I'm gonna go hide in my hole.
Well, also, like, then is it like, are we going to start doing like information security training with that type of technology as well, so that you start to like model that behavior to try to figure out like what is, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to start being like, I need like a physical identifier again when I join a virtual meeting, is where I think that could be headed, right? Like, I might need a specific pen that has an ID number that only I know, and it's now we're going back to physical keys again. So the security committee, like the community around those keys that we had on our like desk, little like cabinet locks for our laptops as well. I think those are going to like maybe come back. Because I think unfortunately, like, it is going to be really hard to discern what's real, and that's the part of it that I find really scary, because I think there are some conversations in this space specifically around privacy as well, where we're talking about, and security is just the intention of how do you cryptographically sign materials to basically like prove your identity, that it wasn't created, or if it was, that, if I decided to create a deep fake of myself, that it was like, Milou did this intentionally and she's basically signed off on this thing. But then also that inherently is like, that would be relatively easy to replicate if it's not governed by a governing body, right? Or like an entity that is taking charge of that, and then not also at risk of, I feel like we're just turning into like a fear-mongering situation. You guys are just starting to get scared.
It is. So I don't want to be a fear-monger. I'm not that kind of person. But at the same time, a level of fear is warranted. Because like anything digital is eventually they're going to find a way around it.
Right.
There's just no way. And this is, a lot of people will be surprised to hear me say this, but this is one of those places where blockchain, I think, actually does come into play, because it becomes a more immutable way of tracking things. And, every time I sign off on something, it adds it to my blockchain, and everybody can check to validate that, this is Brian, and everything that's signed off on is on this chain. So we're gonna consider this good. Our technologies, I think, are promising out there. To put something positive on the spin of all this. Unfortunately, the blockchain conversation has been set back in its potential positive uses because of all the negative use with cryptocurrency and those types of things that were going on with it, that tarnished its reputation, tarnished its potential, to be quite frank. And it's going to take us a while to be able to get back to that point where it's something that people like me are willing to talk about, because it won't be as associated with that kind of stuff.
Yes, I think I have that's a different show episode, I think, where we're
100%.
talking about the pros and cons of the blockchain conversation. And I think it's one we should do soon, because I do think you and I are on the opposite sides on this one, in the sense that I think we, in the same way that we feel about generative AI and that technology and trying to make sure that it feels trustworthy, I think we can definitely get into it on blockchain. And I will say, I'm not sure if I'm up for it. Self-deprecating humor is a very, very like high form of humor for me, and I have a kind of mortifying experience with my like first experience with using like NFTs and blockchain, and it honestly was a great learning experience. So maybe I'll use it for a future episode. I'll share my embarrassing story with my inaccessible NFTs. So I'll just say that.
Sounds good. I don't think you're alone in that story either. So
yeah. So then anyways, what I do kind of want to just like shift is where we're talking about like trust and transparency. Obviously, we definitely have severe concerns related to all of the things we just talked about. I think that is healthy too. I don't think we should just be like fully going into this like unassuming. Also, because I think we've learned over the last 10 years, there are certain like major data breaches that we've seen that it's like, wow, if we had done something differently 10 years ago with our data, it like might not have been as bad now. And if we had known, we might have handled our privacy practices differently. Like that's just like because we're learning. Unfortunately, I'm a little concerned we're not learning and adapting quickly enough to keep up. I would encourage adoption of AI technologies with guardrails, in the sense that come up with the risk tolerance for the company. For example, like if you have very sensitive customer data, like probably don't put that in a LLM, right? Like don't put that in a large language model. I don't think that's the best use case, especially if your customers don't know. Like that's, starting to get into like did they opt into that?
if I run my own private one within my four walls, protected by my firewalls and my security, would you feel comfortable with me using your data as a customer to do analytics or whatever it might be there, knowing that it's for my own internal use at that point?
I think this is exactly an example of a good guardrail that a company could put in, like enhance security and ownership of the actual tooling, to break that, like, oh, there's a third party in it, basically. Because we're saying, right, there's like additional sub-service vendors or third-party vendors, whatever you want to call, within the data set. And so suddenly that calls into the entire, like the question, the whole data set. And it's also like, is your data being trained against other things or being shared elsewhere? I think private hosting is a really great option for companies to consider, or again, figuring out like within their budget constraints and also like their ability to adapt, like some of their customers might not be ready to do it yet. Like a lot, it depends on the industry, but certain industries are like pretty anti this new technology because they just aren't exactly sure what they're supposed to be asking of their providers yet. They're not exactly sure how they're supposed to like put their arms around this thing, right? And feel comfortable with the fact that, like you can, look up individuals' names and start training responses to make it sound like people and creating things like deep fakes, which is scary. I think it depends on the sensitivity of the data, as well as then the company's individual risk tolerance, right? Like if the company is working within AI, then like, of course, AI usage and adoption makes sense. But like if a company is working on like very high sensitive, like super classified information, I'm not sure that makes the most sense. I in my mind, I'm always thinking like, how does this read out in the news, right? Like, what is the reputational risk of potentially like jumping into this without maybe taking the time to do that thoughtfully?
Yeah, risk tolerance based on what you're willing to see in the news. That's a good way for people to think about it. What's the data that you would be willing to lose from a customer? And how you would react to that and how your customers react to that. And, what kind of headlines you're willing to see your name associated with. And, if you don't want to be the person that leaks your customers' social security numbers, maybe you shouldn't collect that information. And of course, there's plenty of regulations out there that say if you don't need it, you shouldn't collect it in the first place. But, things like PCI put down those regulations that say don't store that credit card number because it becomes more vulnerable at that point. And I like that. That makes me feel safer putting my credit card into websites, though I generally try to avoid that as much as possible.
Like trustworthy. It comes back into that. Like it's how companies can like establish trust with their end users and customers, whoever that is. which again, in this space right now, like I haven't seen it done yet of what are, there is no standard yet. So what are, how are companies shifting it? That'll be like an interesting conversation in itself about looking at what are the companies asking of their end users? What are we accepting to when we click through stuff and we don't actually open it and look at it? Specifically when we're talking about tooling with generative AI. I will say I did an interesting exercise today where I was actually like took the time this morning to just actually like clean up some of like my digital footprint, which felt like really a lot of work, but honestly rewarding because it's stuff that I set up when I was in college that like maybe doesn't serve me that much anymore, like being fully public. For example, I had like a blog when I studied abroad. That was kind of basically like a virtual diary that was open, but now it's, you know, like maybe that doesn't need to follow me. And so I think I'm starting to shift the thought of like, even when you're putting stuff into these types of models, is like, is this something that like over 10 years I'm still going to want to be associated with? Which is I have no idea. We'll see.
I know when dealing with password managers, getting the content in there made me think a lot about all the things that I have out there. Like how many logins do I really have? And I'm still discovering them on occasion. There's a shopping site that I've used on and off over the years, but haven't used in several years since I started using a password manager. And I went to go buy something there the other day and I'm like, I probably have a login, but it's not in my password manager. And sure enough, I did to reset my password and it came back and I had a password there. So should I have that? Like, and this is a topic for another episode. Should I create an account on every random site that I buy something from?
Or should you be using single sign-on or not?
Yeah. And
maybe that's what we should talk about next.
Personally, this is what drives me to some of the giant online shopping experiences, because I know they have my information. They already have it. I'm never going to get it back. Why should I go to another site and give them that same information? And that weighs in when I go to buy something. Like, should I buy it on the site where I could find everything? Or should I buy it on the site where maybe it's cheaper? Maybe I don't want to give money to the big giant corporation. Maybe it's more of a local company that I want to support. Like, all these things weigh in there. And I guess this is all just to kind of underline, we talked about the risk tolerance that companies go through. We have to do this at a personal level too.
I am actually taking this as like something I'm personally working on at the moment, is to do better about like, one, my digital footprint, but also closing accounts. Like just because I ordered something from like an online retailer like 6 years ago, I'm like, they don't, even though if it's like an old address, it's still like, if it's out there, it's just out there. It's like, I need to like start minimizing how many things I did this. There's an exercise, right? There's an open source tool that I'm happy to share because I'm a big fangirl, which is Have I Been Pwned? Yep. And I am a higher risk tolerant, like a higher risk target, for example, than my husband is, because I am the one who normally like goes to order stuff online on like my account versus like his account. And so like I was doing that review of like over the holidays. One of the things that I did for fun was go through and actually like review all of that because I'm trying to do better about it myself, which again is, I think, part of why we're doing this project, where we're having this exact podcast. And we thought it was a great idea because you and I are both like subject matter experts in our fields, but it does not mean we are like perfect at everything.
Yeah.
There are absolutely times where sometimes I've clicked through. Like, that's just the nature of the thing. We all know that we should do better, but it's now, are we like starting to have the right conversations about how and why?
I think we're both willing to own our experiences and share them with others, and embarrassing as they may be, for the purposes of education and helping others.
Yeah, I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, is we just want to talk about security topics and related things and really just like get to know different experts as well as just professionals and learn from what they're doing, or even like my neighbors. Like, I want to just hear, I'm the one who's like down the street being like, oh my God, I'm hearing about them complaining about mailers. I'm like, oh, you should like do these opt-outs. Cause like, I'm also sick of getting things that I just immediately recycle and I didn't opt in to.
So just wait till you have a kid that's approaching the latter half of their high school career and all the colleges start coming after them. That's a fun experience too.
Yeah. And I think that your opt-in is like, what, because they did standardized testing somewhere or something and probably like check something?
We were discussing that last night, actually, why how they get that. And it's schools I've never even heard of, far, far away from where we live. So
I don't even think
who
they have to
knows?
get, yeah, well, we can get into that in another conversation. I'm not even sure they need to. I think because they're an education provider, I think they're governed differently than most.
Probably.
So, okay. Well, I think we just had like 5 other topic ideas as we're going. So I think we should continue this venture and get to the point that we're actually going to like continue to record episodes and hopefully release them soon.
Yeah. As long as each episode helps us figure out 5 more topics to talk about, I think we've got plenty of runway. So,
in the meantime, as we continue this conversation and are trying to build a social group around socializing security and this podcast that we're so excited about, you can reach us via email at info@socializingsecurity.com, as well as via LinkedIn at the moment. And we are still trying to come up with better community spaces. So please send us your suggestions.
awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.